Thank you guys very much. It's a huge honor to be here, and I, as usual, am a kid in a candy store in places like this. Chandra Hill, I mean, like, amazing stuff that we just heard. The one thing that I took away from it, being the proud father of an 8-month-old, is that kids under the age of 24 are bored, is what I saw in that data, which is not a good sign for our future, I guess. But really amazing use of data to try and understand how we can see things that aren't really seen in traditional demographic segmentation, and very useful given that we don't know a lot about how to use Twitter for advertising, and we don't know a lot about how to use social media for television-based advertising and brand recognition. So really awesome stuff. So what I'd like to talk about is how opinions are changed by the influence that we receive from our peers in the crowd. So let me put it this way. 5, 7, 10 years ago, we didn't have anywhere near the amount of access or exposure to the opinions of others that we do today, right? Think about Facebook, think about Amazon ratings, think about you know, any type of online rating, think about crowdsourcing, think about, you know, who wants to be a millionaire, you know, poll the population to figure out exactly what percentage of people vote Democrat or Republican in the state of Colorado, and so on and so forth. So 5, 10 years ago, we did not have anywhere near the amount of exposure to the opinions of others as we do today. So the question is, how is this changing our judgment? How is this systematically influencing our opinions? And what does that mean, not just for advertising, but for society as a whole? Right? So think about it this way. Here's a talk, right? You're going to consume this talk in a minute. You're going to have an opinion about this talk. How is it that your opinion might be changed if I showed you what a bunch of other people thought about this talk before you consumed it, right? 4.5 stars might be better than you think it's going to be, right? What would you think if I didn't show you that information, and this is the only information you had, right? You might think to yourself, well, you know, I'm not so sure about Sinan, you know, he's not really all that solid. Even though what he says might be solid, I'm biased by the fact that his name appears next to this stuff. So I wonder what your opinion would be if this is all you saw, right? And the content that followed it. So that's the question that I really want to get at today is, what does the presence of this type of information do to our opinion of a product or service? Okay? So in a sense, I want to understand what data science has to say about online ratings, about reputation, and about how identity is influencing our opinions about anything we see online. And I want to be data-driven. I want to be experimental so I can really understand the causal relationships between identity or prior opinions on our judgment and our changes in opinions. And I want to be scientific, so I want to follow a scientific method by developing a hypothesis, testing it with an experiment, and discarding hypotheses that don't pan out and keeping the ones that do. But before I get to all that, let me tell you a little bit of a story. So I was eating at a restaurant called Dojo, which is just around the corner here in New York City. I had eaten there a couple of times before. It's a staple of Greenwich Village. People who live here know it well. They're sad because it's closed right now. I don't know if it's reopened, but it's been closed for a while, renovating. And so I went there and I ate, and then afterwards I wanted to rate the restaurant. So I went to Yelp, and there I am, logged into Yelp with my ID. I'm about to rate this restaurant, and essentially when I went to the restaurant and I ate the food and I saw the prices and everything, I thought it was average. Okay, I mean, it's not a great restaurant, it's not a bad restaurant, so I was prepared to give it a 3. Right? So I get to Yelp, about to give my 3-star rating, and what do I see? Here's where I would input my rating, and right next to where I would input my rating is Char H with a bright red 5-star rating, waxing poetic about how the prices are amazing. It's fresh and amazing, sweet and tartar ginger dressing. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, given the prices, that tartar sauce was pretty good. That ginger dressing was really tangy, so I gave the place a 4. right? And then I thought to myself, well, what does that mean exactly, right? Because I'm going to Yelp to determine what are the independent opinions of the crowd about this restaurant, to get sort of an unbiased view about how good this place is. But if I increased my rating because I saw someone else's rating, what if other people were also doing that? What if this was happening in a systematic way? Then what are the implications for online ratings in general? What are the implications for any scenario in which we are exposed to prior opinion prior to giving our own opinion? What does this mean for commerce? What does this mean for society? What does it mean when you hear an election poll the day before you vote? Okay? So the problem with trying to understand this relationship, I want to know how prior ratings affect future ratings, is that it's incredibly difficult to estimate because it's confounded and endogenous. What do I mean by that? I mean that, sorry, this should say quality. That's a typo. Prior ratings could be driving future ratings, or it could simply be that highly rated items today aren't rated highly because they were rated highly yesterday, but because they're good. So the people who rated them highly yesterday are rating them highly because they're good, and the people that are rating them highly today are rating them highly because they're good. So essentially, quality is confounding prior ratings, the relationship between prior ratings and future ratings. Really the only way to get at this in a sort of verifiable sense, and I've tried many, many times to establish causality in observational data, we can get pretty close, like 80% or 75% are the recent numbers. But in my mind, the gold standard is to do a randomized experiment. So what we did was we did a randomized experiment where we manipulated the ratings of items online, and we saw how these manipulations changed the ratings in the future and what it did to people's opinions. And this was work done with Lev Muchnik, who's a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and with Sean Taylor, who's a data scientist at Facebook and hopefully soon to be a graduate of the NYU Stern School of Business with his PhD. So what we did was we manipulated online ratings of content on a website like dig.com. And we manipulated the ratings of comments because the ratings of articles are pushed into an algorithm that then drives articles up the more they're upvoted and down, and that itself is an endogenous process. But comments stay exactly where they're supposed to stay. What did we find? All we did was give an item at its birth either a +1 or a -1 rating. Okay? And we saw what this did to future ratings. And it turns out that what happens is it creates a 25% increase in the mean rating of items, okay? 25% from a single upvote, okay? And it creates no effect for the downward manipulation. So the downward manipulation doesn't change future ratings. The upward manipulation increases ratings by 25%, a dramatic number. If you look under the hood, what's going on? Well, it turns out that the positively manipulated comments are more likely to be upvoted. The negatively manipulated comments are also more likely to be downvoted, so you would see the beginnings of a downward herding bias. But that's overwhelmed by what we call a correction effect, which is that people go in and they see a negative manipulation, they're more likely to upvote it than they would have had there not been a negative manipulation. They correct what they see as an unjust rating on an item, okay? What it means is that people are willing to herd or go along with positive opinions, but are skeptical of negative opinions online. What does this do? Well, it creates a snowballing of positive opinion about an item, which creates this 25% increase in mean ratings, and it leads to a superstar effect, okay? Positive herding snowballs into rating stardom. In fact, you're 30%, if you're positively manipulated, you're 30% more likely to exceed a score of 10, which is no small feat because the mean rating is 1.9 on this site, okay? So, and negative herding is neutralized by this correction effect. All these treatment effects also vary by the category. So there's strong treatment effects in business, culture, and society, and politics. Lots of positive herding, snowballing, and superstar effects. Not so much in general news, economics, and fun. If this is true for brand categories, which we're studying now, then some categories are going to be susceptible to this and some aren't, and that's going to affect how brands think about their online reputation. What are the implications? Well, brands might want to encourage truthfully positive customers who actually had a good experience to rate early, because this type of thing may create a path dependence in the opinion in the population. And also, it makes you wonder, does fraud prevention work? Well, how does Yelp deal with fraud? It has a bunch of machine learning algorithms that it doesn't reveal that go in and try to identify fraudulent ratings. When they find one, and they don't even report how well they're doing or how poorly they're doing, when they find one, they rip it out, right? They say, no more, we take this fraudulent review out. But does that solve the problem? Well, this evidence indicates that the insidious nature of the bias is that this fraudulent rating has biased all of the ratings that come after it, even if those aren't fraudulent but actual opinions. So the question about fraud detection isn't just about identifying fraudulent ratings, but thinking about the systematic effect of fraud on the opinion of the population itself. In addition, you should think about, does your product exhibit social influence bias, because we have these category effects of in one category it's true, in another category it doesn't. And of course, if this type of herding bias exists outside of online ratings but other types of opinion formation, what are the implications for stock market bubbles, for housing bubbles, for sales of your product? The other thing was, as we were writing this paper, it was just before the 2012 election, and I was thinking to myself as I kept hearing poll results on NPR, are these polls actually predicting the result of the election, or are they driving the result of the election? If I hear that Obama has an 80% approval rating, maybe I think to myself, well, he's doing better than I thought he was doing. Most people in society seem to think he's doing pretty well. Now, opinions and ratings are one thing, but at the same time, identity and content are inexorably linked in social media these days. It's actually what makes social media social. Whenever you do a post like this or some sort of a comment, your identity, be it a moniker or your actual name, is tied to the content that you're posting. And in fact, this is the foundation of new social advertising, which is based on social proof. If Foster is my friend, had he been on Facebook, if Foster was my friend on Facebook, and he saw that I liked a certain television show, and Facebook in a social ad showed my face, how would that influence his opinion about that television show? This is the basis of how Facebook social ads work. Social proof, which of your friends are buying certain brands or are interested or liking certain television shows, for example, and so on. But it's also true for Google's friendorsements, right? So this is, this is also true for Google's friendorsements. When you search something on Google, it might show you prior product ratings of your G+ friends next to the search results, indicating, well, I'm looking for the Google Nexus, and Roger Willis thinks it's a great value, 5 stars out of 5, right? And now social proof and prior opinion of your social circle is being inputted not only into social ads, but into search results as well. Again, you have a problem of correlation and causation, because user quality could drive the content quality of the item you're posting and the identity effect, how much it coming from Sinon affects people's judgment. So again, we ran another experiment. And what we did was we essentially, for 5% of the cases in this online news aggregation website, similar to dig.com, we suppressed the identity of the user. And in 95%, we left the identity. And we tried to understand how this presence of identity affects people's future opinions. What we found was that commenters' identities significantly change both turnout and positivity rates in both directions. What that means is that people, depending on who you are, when they see your name attached to the comment, they are either much more likely to vote or not vote, and or they're much more likely to vote positively or vote negatively. Which means that some people have a systematic sort of halo effect. They get voted on more often and voted on more positively when you know it's them. For some people, it's the opposite. They get voted on systematically less often and more negatively when you know it's them, okay? In addition, some commenters' identities significantly increase reply rates in the discussion, the back and forth commentary that happens on the websites. No significant effects for the negative direction of reply rates. Now, interesting question when you see these results is this because of selection effects or actually changing people's opinions? So, for example, if I see that the presence of identity creates more positive voting, is this because a different subset of the population turns out to vote on that person's comment when they know it's him? Or is it the same set of people who are changing their minds from being negative to being positive? So imagine you're all going to vote on this talk afterwards. And in the first instance, when you don't know it's me, I'm behind a shroud and you don't know the name and my voice has been disguised, and you vote, is it that the same people who vote, who turn out to vote, vote the same way they would have, but when you reveal who I am, this half of the room votes instead of this half of the room, and therefore my ratings go up or down? Or is it the same type of people voting, but they're changing their minds about what's going on? Selective turnout, identity cues select more ratings from different populations of commenter viewer pairs, whereas the opinion change is where identity cues cause viewers to change their opinions. Well, it turns out that there's evidence for selective turnout, that negative viewers are the most likely to increase turnout when you show an identity. People who have tended to vote negative in the past are more likely to vote when they know who they're voting for or against. But there's also very significant evidence for opinion change. The within commenter viewer pair data shows increases in positivity and turnout, meaning that people are actually changing their minds. People who used to vote a certain way for a given person are more likely to vote positively for that person when they know it's them than they would if their identity is hidden. Okay? Note that this does not examine the heterogeneity of the treatment effects at the comment level. Okay? So it could be that viewers of a given commenter's comments turn out more or are more positive given the content or the types of content, which is similar to the domain that Chandra was discussing. So for instance, Sinan's viewers become more positive when Sinan writes a long comment, but not so much when Sinan writes a short comment. We're working on that question currently. So essentially, in terms of identity effects, who you are matters. So rating and reply behaviors are affected by identity. Identity creates increases and decreases in turnout and positivity that depend on who you are. And both selective turnout and opinion change drive the results. So what does this mean? All of this evidence taken together. First, there's herding behavior in our opinions online. They're influenced by prior opinion. We find this positive snowball herding that creates superstar effects in some categories, with online ratings bubbling into much more positive ratings. There's path dependence, which means the initial signals are really important and they snowball into what the final opinion turns out to be. There's asymmetry. Positivity snowballs, whereas negativity is constrained by this correction effect. And the rich, which means that the rich get richer, which creates superstar effects, right? Because you have no negative herding, but positive herding. So the initial people who get richer and richer from a reputation standpoint. And identity matters. So the effects depend on who you are. Why is this so important? Well, if we're talking about social advertising, it indicates that there is a very strong possibility for the effectiveness of personalized social advertising. When someone is looking for fashion, do not show Sinan as social proof. When someone is looking for music, show Vasant as social proof. Okay? And that means that you won't get this average social advertising where it's, oh, just show friends or close friends. It's show friends or close friends who have the greatest likelihood of moving the opinion of that particular person on that particular product. That is a whole new dimension of social advertising. We're applying this same science to spread HIV testing in South Africa. We're working with Nike to understand how these types of behaviors influence the contagion of exercise and running behavior amongst friends. We're working with MTV to understand how this type of social influence affects the likelihood of voting and political mobilization. And we're working with the New York Times to try and understand how these type of opinions online affect content consumption on the Times and what that means to pricing and subscriptions of the Times online. We're working with an organization called Peace Text to try and understand how peer-to-peer social influence might de-escalate political violence events in Kenya. And with that, I will stop.